Ask anyone about Y2K today, and they'll tell you it was a massive scam, a media hoax, the biggest Nothingburger of the 20th century. But the uncomfortable truth is that the world didn't avoid a digital apocalypse because the threat was fake. We survived because an invisible army of programmers executed the most expensive, high-stakes rescue mission in human history. To understand why our entire modern infrastructure was built on a ticking time bomb, you have to travel back to the dawn of computing. In the 1960s and 1970s, data storage wasn't just limited, it was astronomically expensive. Back in 1975, a single kilobyte of computer memory could cost upwards of $100. Programmers were forced to ruthlessly compress data just to make their code functional. And they did this by mimicking old punch card techniques. Their most common space-saving trick? Chopping the 19 off the year, storing 1978 as simply 78. It was a brilliant hack for the era, but it carried a fatal flaw. A renowned IBM computer scientist named Bob Bemer noticed the looming danger as early as 1958, practically begging the industry to use 4-digit years. But his warnings were largely ignored. Nobody writing software in the mid-20th century truly believed their makeshift, poorly documented code would still be running decades later. Former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan even admitted that programmers never imagined their mathematical shortcuts would survive beyond a few years. But as technology rapidly advanced, those early systems didn't disappear. They became the foundational bedrock for global banking, government databases, and power grids. As the 1990s rolled in, the mathematical reality of this shortcut became terrifyingly clear. When the clock struck midnight on January 1st, 2000, computers wouldn't know if 00 meant 2000 or 1900. This wasn't just a display error on a screen. Computers rely on dates to calculate everything from bank interest and tax penalties to the trajectory of military assets. If a banking server suddenly thought a century had passed in reverse, the financial implications would be catastrophic. The media, newly empowered by the explosive rise of the internet and amateur blogs, threw gasoline on the fire. The 90s marked a shift from the trusted corporate fact-checking of the Walter Cronkite era to an explosion of easily accessible, highly sensationalized information where anyone could publish anything. Tabloids and television anchors predicted that airplanes would literally drop from the sky. Preachers and survivalist authors fueled mass hysteria, taking advantage of people's fears to sell survival gear and convincing millions to stockpile weapons, hoard food, and prepare for the total collapse of civilized society. But behind the sensationalism and the noise, a genuine, desperate race against time was underway. Realizing that inaction would lead to global infrastructure failure, governments and corporations mobilized an unprecedented workforce. Legions of unsung programmers were hired to sit in cubicles and do the mind-numbing work of manually hunting through billions of lines of legacy code. They deployed strategies like date expansion to rewrite 2-digit years into 4, and date windowing to install logic patches that would instruct the system on which century a 2-digit year belonged to. It was a monumental, grueling effort that came with a staggering price tag. Worldwide, the estimated cost of preparing for and remediating the Y2K bug surpassed $300 billion, with the United States alone spending roughly $100 billion on the rescue effort. So, did all that money actually do anything? If you listen to the skeptics, the whole thing was a massive overreaction. Critics often point to countries like Italy or Russia, which spent a fraction of the money on remediation, but seemingly experienced the same lack of major disasters, or they highlight small businesses that did nothing and survived just fine. But that narrative ignores the reality of global system updates and routine operating system patches that carried hidden Y2K fixes. More importantly, it falsely assumes that nothing happened. Things absolutely did break on Y2K. And the glitches that slipped through the cracks prove exactly how devastating the bug would have been if left completely unchecked. Across the globe, bizarre and dangerous anomalies flooded in. In Germany, A banking customer briefly received a $6 million account balance because the computer calculated a century of compound interest dating back to December 30th, 1899. A video rental store in New York generated a $91,000 late fee for a single tape. In South Korea, hospital intake computers completely failed, while a newborn baby was officially registered as a 100-year-old. Over in Norway, a kindergarten accidentally offered a daycare spot to a 105-year-old woman because the citizen registry only read the last 2 digits of her birth year. While some of these errors were mildly amusing, others were genuinely terrifying. In the United Kingdom, a missed Y2K patch caused medical computers to miscalculate the ages of pregnant mothers, resulting in over 100 incorrect risk assessments for Down syndrome. In Japan, alarms at a nuclear power plant's radiation monitoring equipment blared mere seconds after midnight due to a date management failure. And in the United States, a critical computer patch actually backfired at Fort Belvoir, causing ground control stations to completely crash and lose the ability to process information from a network of top-secret spy satellites for several days. The evidence is undeniable. The bug was absolutely real, and its consequences were highly destructive. The only reason our global economy didn't grind to a halt is because the global IT community successfully defused the bomb before it could fully detonate. They forcefully dragged thousands of outdated corporate networks into the modern era, forcing hardware and software upgrades that were decades overdue. The ultimate tragedy of the Y2K programmer is this: when you execute a massive crisis prevention plan with absolute perfection, the rest of the world simply assumes there was never any danger to begin with. The greatest tech rescue mission in history was so successful, it accidentally convinced humanity it was all an elaborate hoax. But while those unsung heroes managed to fix the 2-digit-year problem, they inadvertently left behind a much deadlier trap. Deep inside the unupdatable embedded systems running our modern world lies a 32-bit time bomb, counting up to an integer limit that is hard-coded to overflow and detonate on January 19th, 2038. The real crash is coming. So hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss our next video breaking down exactly what happens when computers finally run out of time. And that's another forgotten story from Circuit and Chalk. If you love uncovering the blueprints of our past, hit subscribe and join the community. Your likes help these forgotten stories survive. What retro tech should we sketch next? Let me know in the comments.